All right, everyone, welcome to our virtual Art After Hours, our first one of 2021, on the theme of Love is Love. So thank you for joining us. We have a really exciting slate of activities planned, starting with our gallery talk on The Palmer is for All Lovers, where we'll be talking about a diverse representations of love in the Palmer's permanent collection. We're going to hear from the Center for Sexual and Gender Diversity for a brief presentation on all of the work that they do for our Penn State community and the kind of resources that they make available for the students. We will follow that up with a fun love-related art trivia with Kahoot for a chance to win different prizes, gift baskets from Uncle Eli's with great art supplies. So we'll hope you'll stick around for that. And then we're going to conclude with a speed dating personality quiz, which may be having you scratch your head a little bit of how we're going to make that work. But look out for that. It's a lot of fun. And thanks again for joining us. Before we get started with the talk, I want to go ahead and introduce our Art After Hours team. I am Keri Mongelluzzo, a graduate assistant at the Palmer. We have also with us Victoria Kenyon, another graduate assistant who will be joining me with the gallery talk. Okay, Victoria, if you just want to say hello.
Yes, hi everyone.
We also have Tess Dubler, one of our undergraduate interns from art history. Uchenna Wodum, another undergraduate intern in art history and political science.
Hello.
And Lauren McKee, our third undergraduate intern in art history and the BFA acting program.
Hi, everyone.
Just a preview of things to look out for. And this is a photo of the prize that you could win if you place top 3 in our Kahoot trivia. A little bit more information about our speed dating personality quiz. And a preview of some events that are coming up as well at the Palmer. Mark your calendars for Wednesday, March 3rd for an enlightening museum conversation led by our Assistant Director, Joyce Robinson, who will be joined by Joe Margulies and Mary Judge, both artists who will be on view. Their work will be on view in the Mark Makers exhibition that will be opening shortly at the Palmer. So mark your calendars. We also are open to the public using time tickets now that you can reserve on the Palmer's website. These are 2 of our special exhibitions that actually just opened last Wednesday. Field Language, the painting and poetry of Warren and Jane Rohr, as well as the wit and whimsy of Lucille Corcos. So do go ahead and reserve your time ticket and stop in at the Palmer to see these new exhibitions. We also will be having an open call for all of our Penn State student makers, not just artists who work with paint and canvas or clay, but makers of all kinds, makers who produce data visualizations, who are into cosplay, poetry, architectural models. It's endless. We're going to be having a virtual exhibition of student creativity at Penn State to go along with our Art After Hours event for April. So as student makers, if you are in attendance, please do look out for that call. You can also catch up more with what the Palmer has been doing with our online art club, which you can find all of those videos on YouTube, as well as Palmer in Your Pocket that many of our Art After Hours team members are a part of. So check those out on social media and YouTube. And now we're finally able to go ahead and start our gallery talk on The Palmer is for All Lovers, which Victoria Kenyon will join me to kind of give you a preview of different kinds of objects in the Palmer's collection that represent love in its many forms and expressions. If you have questions throughout the talk, want some clarification, please do submit those questions in the Q&A. Do not submit them in the chat. Do submit them in the Q&A and we'll keep track of those and be able to go through them at the end. And so to kick us off, we have this screen print here by Marcel Duchamp, a famous French Dadaist conceptual artist, kind of the forerunner of conceptual art, who produced this composition with a series of inset hearts that are alternating in this orangey red and blue against a black backdrop. And as we're going through the museum's database, I came across this object, and it kind of instantly hit me that it fit our theme, because we see this symbol of the heart as kind of synonymous for love. We use the heart to stand in for the word love in, the use of emojis, are ways that we like and react to things on social media. The popular phrase, I heart New York, I love New York. It doesn't have the word love written out, but it just uses a heart. And so we have this object here by Marcel Duchamp that really fits in with this theme, kind of speaking to the universal quality of love, that it's not just limited to any singular form or expression. And this object here by Marcel Duchamp actually references an earlier composition from 1936 that he designed. It was the cover for Cahiers d'Art, or this French kind of review of art. And it came from 1936, so it was on the cover. And that issue in particular addressed the surrealist object. Artists like André Breton and Man Ray were featured in that issue as well. So later, actually the last year of his life, he revisited this particular composition and titled it Cœur Volant, which is often translated in English as fluttering hearts. And so this title is speaking to Duchamp's interest in humor and wordplay, because not only is it describing this subject matter, but it's getting at the kind of optical sensations that this particular object kind of leaves us with. That this particular shade of blue and particular shade of red, when juxtaposed beside one another, produce this kind of fluttering, vibrating effect on the eye. And you can notice that the two central hearts in the composition, the inner hearts, are tilted a little bit to the right, whereas the two outer hearts tilt slightly in the opposite direction. That creates this tension within the composition, when combined with this color combination, actually produces this sense of a fluttering heart, or a heart that is a flutter. Right? And so we're going to give you a little bit of a preview for all of these different kinds and forms of love in the Palmer's collection, with these kind of overview slides. And then we'll highlight an object or two from that section a little bit more in depth throughout the talk. So I'm going to kick it off with romantic love, that we have this theme of romantic love being represented throughout art history, whether it's through subject matter, that it, representing a couple in a doorway or in an embrace. It could reference an artist's muse, someone that an artist is romantically involved with or linked to, that really inspires their own creative practices. And so we're going to see a variety of those examples, both gay love, straight, and everything in between. We want to highlight this particular Polaroid photograph taken by Andy Warhol in 1983 of Keith Haring and Juan Dubose. Keith Haring is a well-known pop artist who really came to fame in the 80s, in the mid 80s, for his really cartoon-like graffiti style. And his partner, Juan Dubose, is a DJ. He also installed car stereos as well at the time. They happened to meet one night while out in the club scene in New York City, which was a vibrant kind of environment, especially in the 80s. Quickly, within a month of meeting in 1981, moved in with one another in an apartment on Broome Street in Manhattan, and had a really complicated, intense relationship on and off for 5 years. During this time when Keith Haring was really becoming more well-known in the art world at this time. And we have this really kind of intimate photograph of the two embracing that was taken by Andy Warhol in preparation for a series of larger silkscreen paintings. And Andy Warhol actually wrote in his diary an entry on August 18th from 1983, saying that, Keith Haring and his Black boyfriend, does not name Juan Dubose, stopped by, today, and I took some photos, and they were really lovey-dovey. It was nuts to see during this whole session, right? This particular photo, even though they're in this really close, tight embrace, seated one behind the other, they're a tangle of arms. They create these really nice geometric shapes in the composition between, Keith Haring's shoulders and his right arm, as it's bent almost at a 90-degree angle, forms almost a perfect square. We have Juan Dubose, who reaches from behind to embrace him, his arm creating this nice strong diagonal across his chest. Their expressions they're not, and their gazes are not fixed on one another, but they're directed out at us, at the viewer. They look quite serious. So to me, it seems that there's a little bit of a disconnect between their expressions and their physical, their gestures. But when you look at all of these contact sheets that are taken with a different camera, not through the aid of Polaroid, but produced on black and white film, the series of contact sheets from this session that day, you can see similar poses here, right, that resemble our Polaroid. That, Andy Warhol's description of that session and the couple's interactions with one another are apt. That there are some where, one or the other men, they're not interested in the camera at all, but very much engaged and present with one another before, that, their bodies face one another, and the camera happens to capture perhaps more of an intimate moment between them, right? You can see a series, we have a few other Polaroids that I brought in as well from that same portrait series. And one of the resulting silkscreen kind of paintings that Andy Warhol produced from those photographs. And you can see the dark kind of shadow that lurks behind the figures, as well as the shadow from Keith Haring's kind of shoulder that kind of is cast on Juan Dubose's arm behind, are a result of really kind of strong lighting conditions in Andy Warhol's studio. That was a signature of his style in his Polaroid photography, and really benefited the kind of transition from photographic image to silkscreen painting, that you can see a lot of the strong shadow as well in those paintings. But this one in particular was a part of Keith Haring's estate for the entirety of his life. It hung in his apartment, even 4 years after the end of their relationship. And so we get the sense that, yes, this is a work by Andy Warhol. Of course, he's a well-known artist and was a friend of Keith Haring. But Keith Haring had other works by Andy Warhol. Why didn't he have those hanging in his apartment? That Juan Dubose is said to have been Keith Haring's first real relationship, committed relationship that was fruitful for 5-year period in his life. Shortly after he moved to New York, did he meet Juan Dubose? And the issue is that Juan Dubose is really absent. His voice is absent from Keith Haring's archive. And all of the interviews that I was reading in preparation for this gallery talk, it's just a bunch of other people's projections of who this person was, and what he brought to the relationship, what he got out of the relationship with Keith Haring. It's just, he's referenced as Keith Haring's lover. Andy Warhol didn't even mention his name in his diary. It's just his Black boyfriend. And, issues of power and race and class really feed into this discussion. There was a book that was just published by Ricardo Montes, who's a scholar at the New School recently, called Keith Haring's Line, that really deals with the issue of race in Keith Haring's work, as well as his many kind of cross-racial relationships that he had throughout his life with Juan Dubose and other partners following, right? And so even though we can see this photograph and this object here, this silkscreen painting, and realize how meaningful that relationship possibly was to Haring, we don't get to hear it from Juan Dubose's side. So that's something to definitely keep in mind. And we'll leave it there, but I'd be happy to talk about this work more at the end. And I'll turn it over to Victoria to talk about love in myth and literature.
Great, thank you, Keri. Yes, so since love is such a universal experience, it stands to reason that it would figure prominently in myths and literature from around the world. And several of the works in our collection are artist depictions of love from these often familiar, though sometimes sort of surprising and different kinds of stories. These include scenes from Shakespeare, Greek and Roman myths, and Japanese folk tales, represented in a variety of media, including paintings, drawings, and woodblock prints. While the works and the characters in the different stories and myths that we have depicted in our collection are from different time periods, different societies and cultures, the overarching themes of love, desire, and loss represent experiences that are shared across cultural boundaries. And one of the first works that we're going to talk about, one of the work that we'll talk about in this section, is based on a mythological love story, and it's by American artist Arthur Bowen Davies. This is his dry point on zinc print titled Cupid and Psyche from 1920. And the piece depicts a scene from the tale in which Cupid, the Roman god of love, becomes enamored with a mortal woman named Psyche against the wishes of his mother, Venus, the goddess of love. And the story has been a popular source of inspiration for artists throughout the centuries as one of forbidden love, betrayal of trust, and ultimately of a happy reunion. Now, this print lacks color, so instead it communicates the story only through line. And Davies' modern style really makes this portrayal different from those done in painting and sculpture, which is the media that has often been used to represent classical myths. And what we see here is sort of different sections of the story happening in the same print. So these are, I believe, likely different scenes from the same tale. And one of the big ideas behind the story is that Psyche falls in love with Cupid when he's invisible. He makes himself invisible to her so that she can't see him. And we see that represented here by the image on the left where she's looking out somewhere over his head while he looks up at her. And then the image on the right where she's embracing seemingly thin air.
We also have this really fun Japanese woodblock print titled The Mouse's Wedding. And it actually references a popular kind of Japanese legend that is often told and retold on the occasion of New Year's. The animal of the white mouse is thought to be auspicious and is one of the attendants of one of the gods of good fortune. And so this story of two white mice on the occasion of a wedding is thought to possibly bring in good luck, prosperity in the new year. And so we thought it would just be a very charming example to bring in to share with you all. But there are tons of these representations in Japanese woodblock prints of this particular story in museums across the country. So if you're interested, check those out. It's a popular children's book and story too that you can order. And kind of going along with this idea of literature, we have the common trope of the star-crossed lovers or the forbidden love, right? That it can be because they come from rival families or, right, it's just ill-fated. We have a print here after Albrecht Dürer with the ill-fated couple. But it could also reference different kinds of love that at one point illegal or thought to be taboo or outlawed. such as interracial relationships. And so we have this one contemporary work in the museum's collection, a lithograph by Mexican artist Claudio Dicochea, that references historical casta paintings, which was a genre of painting that really gained popularity in kind of 18th century colonial Mexico. That it was a form of painting in a series of 16 sets or families were shown in a single kind of composition, where the colonial state would represent different interracial relationships and the offspring that would be produced from those relationships. They would always start in some kind of hierarchy with a white Spaniard, a white male, who is partnering up with an elite indigenous woman, and their child would be considered a mestizo. They would then proceed across the composition and down in terms of lightest skin to darkest skinned, and ending with enslaved Africans as well as enslaved indigenous people in Mexico. And these paintings kind of speak to, and the names that they ascribe to different figures of different ethnicities speak to this really colonial anxiety over interracial relationships and mixing. They're really derogatory terms. And so Claudio Dicochea is interested in subverting that genre of painting by imbuing it with pop culture icons and different references to contemporary culture. So here, I'm sure, and the first time that I actually looked at this with another graduate assistant a couple of years ago at the Palmer, when an exhibition was being planned of contemporary works of art, contemporary prints, we're like, okay, this is Einstein, right? We recognize that clearly, but that does not look like Einstein's body, or possibly, that Einstein would be interested in a low rider bicycle. And we were confused as to possibly who these two figures up here would be, that this looks, similar to some kind of British Royal Army uniform. Think Prince William on his wedding day. But we were doing some digging, and we started with the title of the work, which is translated to Of Forbidden Love and the Anarchist, LMC 2.0. And we're like, okay, well, Einstein E equals mc squared, his theory of relativity. And so that Einstein is that component. He's playing the role of the offspring, right, in the traditional casta painting. But we eventually figured out that Amor Prohibido is one of Selena, kind of pop star Selena's albums, her fourth album that she won a series of Grammys for. And the Anarchist refers to Sid Vicious, the bassist of the Sex Pistols. Right. And so here we have them forming this couple, right? This impossible couple, unexpected couple, interracial couple in a particular kind of military uniform associated with the, British royalty. We were unable to identify kind of this particular costume that Selena is wearing. So if anyone has any ideas, I'd love to hear them. I was even doing a little bit more searching through kind of 18th century military uniforms in Mexico, but was unsuccessful. So if you have any ideas, please shout them out. And this particular pose that we have Albert Einstein in directly references a popular photograph taken of Snoop Dogg on one of his lowrider bicycles, down to, you can see the wristbands and bracelets that he's wearing, to a T, right? And so as a way to kind of point to the ridiculousness of casta paintings, and kind of really subvert that genre. And we'll move on to Platonic Love.
Yes, so romantic love we've discussed, and it's beautiful in all of its forms, but of course, romantic love is only one expression of love. Platonic love is not built on the same kind of passion and desire that's present in romantic love, but it's no less impactful in our lives. Friendship and the support that we get from friends, of course, helps us to be honest with ourselves, to grow into better versions of ourselves, and helps us to stay grounded in times of trouble and stress. And friendships are often based on a mutual enjoyment of hobbies or activities like art or hiking or just talking together. And we can see these sorts of activities represented between friends in different works present in our permanent collection. And so some of the works that we have that depict this kind of Platonic love, it's represented, either through the composition itself or through the story behind the work. And so one example that we're going to talk about today is Elizabeth Catlett's Gossip from 2005. And Catlett is a very interesting figure. She's renowned for her work as a sculptor, a graphic artist, and a teacher of art. She was born in Washington, D.C. in 1915, and she was the granddaughter of formerly enslaved people. And she attended Howard University, where she earned an undergraduate degree in art. She studied at the University of Iowa, where she, learned from artists like Grant Wood, who painted the iconic American Gothic in 1930. And Catlett received a Master's of Fine Arts in Sculpture. She taught in New Orleans, and eventually she moved to Mexico in the 1940s. And Mexico is where she would continue teaching and making art. And she would eventually establish citizenship and live in Mexico for the rest of her life. So she really considered herself an African-American and a Mexican artist. And throughout her career, Catlett was particularly interested in representing views that were familiar to her, and she focused on African-American life, especially that of African-American women. And notably, she really was directing her works toward an African-American audience. So in this print, Catlett uses a combination of photolithography and digital printing, and really is creating a kind of collage where the stylized figures sit in front of a background that was like a scanned image of a textile. And this use of pattern and textile is typical of a lot of Catlett's work. She loved to bring in sort of these patterns that she put into her pieces that really contrasted with the rest of the scene. And the striped pattern of the fabric behind the figures replaces a more traditional background. It takes the figures out of any recognizable setting and instead encourages the viewer to focus on the two women represented instead of some larger scene. So as for the central figures themselves, as the viewers, we can get a sense of relationship and familiarity between them by their body language. They're positioned close together, they're making eye contact, their hands are touching, and the woman on the left is leaning in closer towards the woman on the right. Now, there's a lack of narrative or context here that kind of makes parts of this work a little bit ambiguous, right? So we don't really know the story of these two women. They could be friends, they could also be family members or potentially lovers. But the title, Gossip, does suggest they're engaged in one of the traditional pastimes of friendship, which is an intimate and secretive conversation. Maybe they're talking about another person or other people. This really, further suggests this level of closeness and trust between them. And as the viewers, we are excluded from their conversation. We don't know what they're talking about. So Catlett is both displaying a moment of affection between these two women, but also giving them a little bit of privacy too. Now, it's important to note that one of the reasons why Catlett depicted African-American women in her art was because of her commitment to justice and advocating for the dignity and worth of African-American women and their experience. And this piece presents a moment of camaraderie and companionship between these two figures, which is enhanced by Catlett's inclusion of the Black Power fist in the center, which we can see the woman on the left is resting her head on. And the fist is a symbol of Black pride, defiance, and solidarity. And this is an image that Catlett would explore in other pieces as well, including her sculpture Black Unity from 1968. So in this way, Catlett's piece revolves around a few big ideas, but it is ultimately about sort of the unity between these two women and about love as well.
We're going to move on to Familial Love, which should be familiar to many of us, and the love that we express or share with our families, whether it's biological family or our chosen family, right, that we're born into, or the ones that we choose through our friends. We have different representations of both kind of motherly love with mother and child compositions. We have a pair of a father and son, and we also have two siblings. So we'll highlight that. With this photograph here by James Van Der Zee, he is an iconic photographer and a prolific photographer of the Harlem Renaissance, producing photographs in Harlem between the world wars. And he is known for a lot of his portraits of celebrities or public figures, but he also took thousands of portraits in his photographic studio of kind of middle-class, everyday people. And a lot of them are now anonymous to us. Their names are lost in the record. But Van Der Zee's objects in these photographs survive and kind of counter stereotypical images of Black Americans at this moment in history. That Van Der Zee's photographs kind of capture this really middle-class, everyday kind of identity of the Black Americans and residents in Harlem. And so here we have these two little girls that are posed in matching outfits. It takes me back to memories of, posing with my siblings, being forced to wear itchy, uncomfortable clothes, matching outfits with siblings, for a nice family portrait that would then go either, in a frame and adorn a mantle or end up in a photo album. We also have this adorable dog that is between the two sisters, but it's actually a cardboard cutout of a dog as one of the props in Van Der Zee's studio that people could pick to pose with. He also had these elaborate painted backdrops as well that people could pose in front of to produce these images here. But we'll move on to a different kind of familial love.
Yes, so another one of these kinds of familial love that we'll talk about, and one that's really been represented by artists throughout almost the entirety of art history, is that between mothers and children. And we have two works here that show this kind of love. So we'll start on the left, and on the left we have Romare Bearden's Untitled Mother and Child from 1969, which is a collage piece that is reflective of much of the artist's later work. Bearden was really considered a virtuoso with scissors and made many amazing collage series. And Bearden was an African-American artist who was born in North Carolina, but he grew up in New York and Pittsburgh, and he created lots of different kinds of scenes, but many of them were meant to celebrate and draw attention to the Black experience, and they encouraged love and unity, especially across racial lines. In his own words, Bearden once described his work as, quote, "What I've tried to do is take the elements of Afro-American life in this country as I see it, that is, to place it in a universal framework," unquote. So here we get an up-close view of a mother and her child, but not a lot of hints about their identity. And Bearden is really, purposefully depicting them as racially ambiguous here. He's also relying on motifs from earlier eras of art history, like Renaissance images of the Madonna and Child that many of us have probably seen in museums. And Bearden really enjoyed calling back to religious themes, classical myths, and pieces of art like Ife masks from West Africa. And he liked to combine different visual themes together to suggest timelessness and the universal nature of scenes of love like this one. So another work that illustrates a mother's love with her children is the one on the right that we'll talk about next. And this is Lewis Hines' Mona Lisa Madonna, Ellis Island. So this photograph was taken in 1905 as part of the artist's effort to document new immigrants who were coming to the United States through Ellis Island in New York Harbor. And Hine was a photographer who wanted to document the lives of the working classes and immigrants in order to educate people and affect social change. He recognized the power of the camera to present a snapshot of life in a straightforward, honest way. So that's what he is trying to do in scenes like this, is to depict reality for people who may otherwise not see this sort of scene. And Hein is well known for his photographs of children working in factories, which in the early 20th century helped, play a role in the effort to end child labor in the United States. So the title of this piece, Mona Lisa Madonna, likely refers in part to the woman's Italian nationality, but it also makes a direct allusion to paintings of the Madonna and Child, inviting the viewer to compare the familiar image of the Virgin Mary and infant Christ to this immigrant woman and her children. The framing of the shot I find very interesting. We have an arched window behind the figures on this bench, and it makes the connection to Renaissance works even stronger since they often show the Virgin Mother and the Christ Child in this sort of architectural setting. It also almost seems to be giving the woman sitting there with her children on her lap a sort of halo as well. And this is not the only work that Hein titled Madonna. And this sort of religious reference that he's making through the title, it encourages the viewer to sympathize with the figure. It also, may have other significance too for, making an even stronger comparison to the Holy Family, since in the Bible, they also immigrated to a new land to find safety and peace. So the fact that Hein is trying to get the viewer to sympathize with this family is a really important component of this work, because the early 20th century was a period that saw increased immigration to the United States, but also intense nativism and anti-immigrant sentiment. So that's part of what he's trying to work against through documenting these scenes. And Hein's view of this family is humanizing and authentic, and it's another one of these representations of the universality of love. The viewer does not get to learn much about the story of the woman and her children in this photo. We don't know anything about them other than what we can see, but Hein captures a moment of smiles and closeness, and this really reflects their love and a sense of optimism as they're posed together, getting ready to begin a new life in America.
As a photo historian, this is one of my favorite objects in the Palmer's collection, so thanks for talking about it, Victoria.
Yeah, it's a great one.
We'll move on to puppy love.
Yes, so of course, love between human beings is not the only kind of love we can experience. We've likely all heard of puppy love. This is the term that's often used to describe that sort of all-encompassing, possibly fleeting love that's felt by younger people, and it's named for the kind of love that puppies just give out freely to everyone. A puppy loves everyone that he sees or that she sees, and sometimes the phrase puppy love is applied in this way, but sometimes it's also more literal. And those of us with pets know how close a bond we can form with our animal companions and how much love we can feel for them. If you're the kind of pet owner that I am, your phone is probably full of images of your pet, and you probably have more framed photos of them than you do of yourself. And in the same way, artists throughout the centuries have been interested in representing their four-legged friends through a variety of different media. And so that's what we'll be talking about here. So an example of this is from the American artist Will Barnett. This is his 1982 screen print titled A Woman with Cats. And the screen print technique, perhaps most famously used by Pittsburgh native Andy Warhol, who we talked about earlier, involves using a mesh screen, a stencil, and a squeegee to push ink through the screen onto a surface. And this allows the artist to mass produce copies of the same image. That's the technique that Barnett's using here. And Barnett was notably a cat lover who owned several felines and often depicted them in his art, including in self-portraits. In particular, he had one cat named Madame Butterfly, which is just a fantastic cat name. And he pictured this cat in a separate print with his wife, Elena. So as the title of this piece suggests, it is an image of a woman and two cats. The woman here is lounging in an orange and white robe. She has one black cat curled at her side and the other held up in her arms. I find the way she's holding the cat just so charming. The cat's holding out their legs as if they're trying to wiggle out of her grasp, but they ultimately seem resigned to their fate, which is just sort of a classic cat pose. And the cats here are very interesting. They're really rather abstract. They don't have any color besides black. They don't have eyes, noses, or other details. And Barnett is really known for this kind of flat, minimalistic, highly stylized way of depicting both humans and feline figures. Um, and an additional feature that's noteworthy about this piece is the inscription on the bottom that reads, "Happy birthday, dear Terry, with love, affection, Elena." So this work of art does not just represent love, but it was also a gift that was given as a symbol of affection and appreciation.
And that's how we're going to wrap up the gallery talk. That as I was going through the museum's collections database of over 9,000 objects using search terms like love, affection, marriage, couples, most of the works that were flagged are not because they had the word love in the title, but because we had the word love as an inscription. Meaning that a lot of these objects, or several of them in the museum's collection, were made by artists with someone in mind, or gifted later to someone whom they love. And so even though we walk into museums or encounter, art objects and images on screens in the virtual realm, and just think that, we're supposed to have some kind of visual experience of them, that these are very much objects that meant a lot to the artists themselves and the people to whom they were gifted, that they can tell us something about relationships between people, and we can get something from that relationship by looking at these objects. So this is just a little survey of some inscriptions that we found in the collection. Gifts for anniversaries, for Christmas. This one I love, is my favorite, to Uncle George, right? With love. And I've encountered that particular painting a lot in the galleries. I've had students write essays about it and never knew that little fact about it. And now every time I, see it hanging in the Palmer's gallery, I'm going to think about Uncle George, whoever, he may be. But we'll conclude the gallery talk there and take any questions you have before I turn it over to Eric Duran from the Center for Sexual and Gender Diversity. But any questions before we do that?